at 3 a.m. on a bitter January night in 1978. The kind of night where the cold feels sharper because nothing is moving. McGuire Air Force Base was doing what it was built to do. It was staying quiet, staying orderly, staying predictable. No scheduled landings, no training sortie listed, no alarms, no radio chatter that suggested trouble. Just the low hum of a working installation, instruments glowing in the tower, security lights cutting thin lines into the dark, and men doing routine jobs that rarely become stories. But the unsettling truth is this: history does not announce itself with sirens. It slips in through small anomalies that look harmless until they are not. A single radar return, a faint light where there should be none, a pause in a patrol car, and then one decision made in seconds. The sort of decision that cannot be undone. This case endures because what followed was not just strange. It was administratively toxic. It was the kind of event that does not fit into any normal report. And when something cannot be filed neatly, institutions tend to bury it. Before we go deeper, if you like stories told with detail, caution, and a little bit of dread, subscribe to the channel. It helps the algorithm push these long investigations to people who actually want them. And please comment where you are watching from, city and country, if you are comfortable, because it is always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. And sometimes the place you live changes how you interpret what you are about to hear. Now, take a breath, because this is not a story that starts with aliens. It starts with procedure. It starts with a base doing its job, and then realizing that something out there was not following any known rule. In early 2020, decades after the night at McGuire, the United States Department of Defense made a move that many people once thought would never happen. It publicly acknowledged that several encounters recorded by military pilots were real and could not be identified. Not declared extraterrestrial, not confirmed as enemy aircraft, not dismissed as mistakes, simply unidentified. For years, grainy clips had circulated online, debated frame by frame by amateur analysts to skeptics. But then the official statement arrived, and suddenly uncertainty had a government stamp on it. That shift mattered, because the moment an institution admits it does not know, older stories that were once mocked begin to look different, not proven, but reopened. It becomes harder to laugh at witnesses from the past when the present has its own unexplained cases, backed by sensors, radar tracks, and trained observers who had everything to lose by speaking. In that climate, the McGuire story returned, not as a guaranteed truth, but as a question that refused to die. To understand why a single night in New Jersey still matters, you have to understand how the Cold War shaped the mind of the military. Bases were not just buildings, they were borders, and borders are psychological as much as physical. A breach was not treated as curiosity, it was treated as intent. In the late 1970s, the United States had lived through decades of espionage fears, aircraft incursions, and technological surprises. Security doctrine trained people to assume the worst until proven otherwise, especially at night, especially near strategic installations, especially when something moved in ways that did not match ordinary aircraft. That is why this story cannot be told properly as a simple paranormal tale. It is a story about how an institution reacts to uncertainty, how individuals react under pressure, and how memory becomes contested when the event is too embarrassing, too dangerous, or too unbelievable to leave in daylight. In that sense, whether you believe in aliens or not is almost secondary, because the core question is simpler and more disturbing. What happens when a controlled system encounters something it cannot classify? McGuire Air Force Base sits in Burlington County, New Jersey, and it operates in close relationship with Fort Dix, an Army installation established in 1917. Over decades, Fort Dix became a major staging and training hub through the First World War, the Second World War, Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. McGuire grew alongside it, sharing the region, sharing the airspace, and in practice, sharing a security ecosystem. The fence between them existed, but personnel crossed back and forth in daily work, and security cooperation was routine. Around them lies a landscape that can look ordinary in daylight and deeply isolating at night. Pine forest, flat stretches, long access roads, and wide dark gaps where sound travels strangely. This area is part of the broader Pine Barrens region, which has its own history of odd reports. Lights in the sky, disorientation, and folklore that clings to quiet places. Some people treat that as proof of something supernatural. Others see it as what happens when wide wilderness sits beside military activity and human imagination fills the space between. Either way, it is the stage on which the night unfolded. In the early hours of January 18th, control tower personnel at McGuire noticed an unexpected radar contact. That alone does not sound dramatic. Radar can be noisy, weather can confuse returns, equipment can create ghosts. The reason this mattered is that there were no flights scheduled that matched the contact, and the standard checks did not explain it away. A technician stepped out onto the tower balcony with binoculars to take a look. A simple human habit that has saved more lives than any machine, because eyes can sometimes confirm what instruments cannot. Out over the dark perimeter, in the direction of Fort Dix, he saw a faint glow, not a floodlight, not a rotating beacon, not a car headlamp. It was soft, almost like a muted ember in the distance. Then it went out as if someone had flipped a switch. When he returned inside to report it, he learned that the radar contact had vanished at the exact same time. The timing was clean, almost too clean, and that was enough to trigger a call to Fort Dix security. Not a base-wide panic, just a request. Check the perimeter, see if anything is out there. At Fort Dix, the response was calm and limited. No emergency mobilization, no convoy, no dramatic radio traffic that later could have leaked into local rumor. A single military police officer took keys to a patrol vehicle and began a methodical sweep along the fence line that marks the boundary between the two installations. This is important because many extraordinary stories begin with too many moving parts, too many unnamed actors, too much cinematic chaos. This one begins with a single person doing a routine job alone. The kind of job that is boring until it suddenly is not. He drove slowly, scanning gates, checking shadowed corners, watching for signs of tampering or trespass. The winter night was quiet enough that even small sounds would stand out. For a time, nothing did. Then the patrol vehicle stopped, not because he planned to stop, but because something in front of him made stopping unavoidable. Something hovering only a few feet above the ground near the fence. Close enough that he could judge its size, about as large as the vehicle itself. The object was described as cylindrical, metallic, and strangely alive in the way it handled light. Its surface did not blaze. It pulsed, a muted red glow that rose and fell rhythmically, like a slow heartbeat. The officer listened for an engine, a rotor, a whine, any familiar sign of propulsion. He heard nothing. Only wind through the pines and distant animal calls that belonged to the landscape. Silence is not proof of anything, but silence that accompanies motion is always unsettling because it breaks the normal contract between cause and effect. He stayed inside for a moment, watching, trying to fit it into a category: helicopter, experimental aircraft, a vehicle suspended by cables, a prank, anything. Then his attention snapped toward movement in the darkness, the sound of quick footsteps over gravel and hard ground. A figure emerged running toward the hovering object, not strolling, not hesitating, sprinting as if it had a destination and a deadline. In the red glow, the figure's proportions appeared small, and its movement was fast, almost too efficient. And in that instant, the officer made the most predictable assumption of a security professional intrusion. He reacted the way he was trained to react. He exited the vehicle, drew his sidearm, fired a warning shot into the air, and shouted for the runner to stop and identify themselves. The command was not theatrical. It was procedural, the voice of someone trying to restore order to a situation that had slipped beyond order. Then something happened that would be difficult to forget, even if you wanted to. The hovering object accelerated straight upward, not an angle, not with a slow climb, but vertically, fast enough that it was gone in seconds, rising into the night until it vanished from view. As it left, the red glow died, and the landscape fell back into ordinary darkness. The running figure also vanished for a beat, swallowed by shadow. The officer swept his torch across the area, searching for movement, and within moments, he reacquired the figure, now running away from the place where the craft had been. He pursued, issuing repeated commands to stop, the logic in his mind tightening. Whatever this is, it is trespassing, and it is trying to escape. The figure reached the fence line and vaulted it, not clumsily, not with the struggle you would expect from a tired human carrying gear, but with a clean, agile leap, landing on the other side inside the boundaries of McGuire. Under scattered airfield lights, the runway opened ahead like a pale strip of concrete cutting through darkness. The figure sprinted across it. The officer reached the boundary and stopped, because crossing into the adjacent base without authorization can itself create a security incident, and in that hesitation, you can feel the friction between protocol and urgency. But the intruder was still in sight, moving fast, and now illuminated enough to track. The officer raised his weapon and fired. Reports say 5 rounds were discharged, several striking the figure, which collapsed forward and hit the runway hard, motionless. In real life, moments like that are not accompanied by music. They are accompanied by a sudden quiet that feels louder than noise, because the mind is trying to process what just happened and what it now has to explain. Security personnel from McGuire converged on the location. The officer returned to his vehicle, raised the alarm, and moved through the gate procedures to reach the runway area where the figure had fallen. When the group gathered around the body, the story pivots from a trespass narrative to something far more difficult to name. The form on the ground was described as roughly the size of a child, but the head appeared disproportionately large. Witnesses described minimal facial features, dominated by large almond-shaped black eyes. The skin was described as tough and reptilian, leathery in texture, as if it were a hide rather than ordinary human skin. And there was an odor, strong, sharp, ammonia-like, the kind of smell that makes the nose recoil before the mind even identifies it. Whether those descriptions reflect reality, misperception, or later embellishment is part of the controversy. But what matters for the structure of the story is that multiple accounts repeat the same core elements: small stature, unusual head, dark eyes, strange skin, chemical smell. The men standing there faced a problem that goes beyond fear. It was the problem of category, because military reporting depends on categories, and this did not fit any approved form. Hours later, a man named George Filer, then an Air Force officer assigned to McGuire as a briefing officer, would later claim that he encountered the story at the base gate in a way that felt almost surreal. He arrived around 4 a.m. and noticed unusual activity. Vehicles clustered on a runway at an hour when the base should have been quiet. When he asked why, a guard reportedly told him, almost in a hushed tone, that a sentry had shot and killed an alien earlier that morning. Filer later wrote that he assumed it was a joke because the human mind protects itself by treating absurdity as humor. Yet as he continued on to base, he noticed something that gave the rumor weight: a large military transport aircraft coming into land. The kind of aircraft associated with serious logistics, not casual errands. In his later recollection, that sight made him reconsider what he had been told, because in military life, unusual aircraft at unusual hours often means something unusual has happened. And that is where the second half of the story begins, not with the alleged being, but with the machinery of response, the quiet tightening of access, the shifting of authority, and the sudden feeling that the event was being pulled upward into a place where ordinary personnel would no longer be allowed to look. George Filer would later say that the atmosphere on the base shifted before anyone explained why. It was not panic, not chaos, but a tightening, like doors quietly closing in sequence. He parked his car, stepped out into the cold air, and watched personnel moving with unusual purpose. Conversation stopped when officers approached. Guards spoke less than usual. The base still functioned, but something had entered the space that did not belong to routine. In military life, that feeling usually means classified material has appeared, and once classification enters the picture, truth becomes layered, restricted, and fragile. Later that morning, Filer was called into a briefing with his commanding officer. There was no dramatic reveal, no confirmation framed as revelation. Instead, the incident was presented in flat procedural language. A perimeter breach had occurred. An unidentified entity had been neutralized. Security protocols were being adjusted. Filer was instructed to gather statements from relevant personnel and compile a preliminary summary for higher command. This was his job, to translate chaotic events into language that could be digested by people far removed from the scene. What unsettled him was not what he was told, but what was not said. As Filer began his interviews, patterns emerged that troubled him. Control tower staff repeated the same sequence: radar contact, visual anomaly, disappearance. Military police described the same object, the same glow, the same silence. Air Force guards described the same body, the same odor, the same confusion about how to report what they had found. These were not excited retellings. They were tired, restrained accounts from people who looked like they had not slept. Inconsistencies existed, as they always do in human memory, but the core details aligned in ways that were difficult to dismiss as coincidence. At one point, Filer attempted to access photographs that had allegedly been taken of the body. He expected bureaucracy, maybe delays, maybe red tape. What he did not expect was an abrupt shutdown. His access was revoked without explanation. The task he had been assigned was quietly cancelled. He was informed that the briefing would be handled elsewhere by others. In military terms, this meant the incident had moved upward into a compartment he was no longer cleared to observe. For an intelligence officer, that is the moment when curiosity becomes dangerous, because asking the wrong question can end a career. Filer did not stop asking questions. Through unofficial channels, he learned that a formal incident report had been filed and classified. He also learned that the body, whatever it was, had been removed from the base within hours. A large transport aircraft had arrived under armed escort. Cargo was loaded quickly. The destination listed was Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. To anyone familiar with military history, that detail mattered. Wright-Patterson has long been associated with advanced research, captured technology, and sensitive investigations that never appear in public summaries. Wright-Patterson's role during the Second World War was to analyze enemy aircraft and experimental weapons. After the war, it became the administrative center for early UFO investigations like Project Sign and Project Blue Book. Officially, those projects concluded that most sightings could be explained. Unofficially, many researchers believe unresolved cases were quietly siphoned away into deeper classification. This reputation did not emerge from nowhere. It grew from decades of silence, denials, and half-acknowledgments that something unusual had passed through its hangars. Sending the McGuire material there, if true, suggests the incident was treated as more than a local embarrassment. According to later accounts, the soldier who fired the shots was also removed from Fort Dix shortly after the incident. He was flown out, debriefed, and never returned to his unit. No public record of reassignment was released. Some say he was transferred to another base. Others claim he was reassigned to a classified facility. Skeptics argue this is normal procedure for sensitive incidents. Believers see it as erasure. The truth may sit somewhere between, because the military often removes people not to punish them, but to reduce the number of witnesses who can talk to each other. Decades passed, and the story remained buried in rumor. Then, years later, George Filer published his memoir. He did not present the incident as proof of extraterrestrial life. He presented it as something he could not reconcile with official explanations. Journalists contacted the Air Force for comment. None was given. Former personnel from McGuire and Fort Dix were interviewed. Some confirmed they had heard rumors at the time. Others claimed to have witnessed unusual activity. A few dismissed the story entirely, insisting that something this extraordinary could never have been kept secret. This split is important because it highlights how memory fractures under institutional pressure. People stationed at the same base can experience the same event differently, depending on where they stood and what they were allowed to see. Commanding officers denied knowledge, perhaps truthfully. Lower-level personnel described confusion and silence. In systems built on hierarchy, ignorance at the top does not necessarily mean nothing happened at the bottom. It often means information never traveled upward in a recognizable form. That gap is where legends grow. There are mundane explanations that deserve consideration. Military pranks exist. Training exercises sometimes simulate intrusions. Psychological stress can distort perception. A person in an unusual suit could look alien under poor lighting. Chemical odors can be misidentified. Each of these explanations accounts for parts of the story. None accounts for all of it. The synchronized radar and visual anomaly, the silent vertical ascent, the rapid removal of material, the transport to a facility with a long history of secrecy. It is the accumulation of unresolved details that keeps the story alive. There is also the geography to consider. The Pine Barrens have produced an unusual volume of reports over the years, from strange lights to missing time to disorientation. Some attribute this to environmental factors. Others suggest military testing draws attention. A more speculative idea proposes that certain locations act as corridors, places where something crosses more easily. There is no evidence for that beyond testimony, but testimony is what history often begins with. Before instruments, before records, people described what they saw, and sometimes they were right long before proof arrived. What makes the McGuire incident unsettling is not the possibility of extraterrestrial life. It is the possibility of contact without understanding. If the figure was non-human, then the event represents a failure of communication with irreversible consequences. If it was human or experimental, then it represents a level of secrecy that erased accountability. Either way, the result is the same: silence, denial, and unanswered questions. Those questions linger not because they promise wonder, but because they suggest vulnerability. When governments now speak of transparency, they do so selectively. Files are released, but gaps remain. New footage is acknowledged, while old cases are ignored. The past stays sealed, even as the present inches toward admission of uncertainty. That contradiction feeds suspicion. It suggests that what happened before modern sensors may be more troubling than what happens now. The McGuire incident sits squarely in that uncomfortable space, too old to verify easily, too detailed to dismiss completely. If an armed being truly ran across that runway, trying to reach a craft that had already fled, then history recorded a moment of fear on both sides. A being unfamiliar with our rules, met by people trained to defend borders at any cost. That interpretation reframes the story not as invasion, but as tragedy. If instead the event was staged, misinterpreted, or classified beyond recognition, then it reveals how quickly truth can be dismantled by procedure. In both cases, the lesson is the same. Uncertainty is dangerous, and silence does not resolve it. The fence between Fort Dix and McGuire still stands. Patrols still run. Lights still glow against the pine forest at night. Nothing outwardly changed. Yet stories like this persist because they point to moments when the system hesitated, when trained people saw something they could not name, when reports stopped flowing upward and started disappearing sideways. These are the cracks where mystery lives, not because it wants to, but because no one sealed them properly. Perhaps one day the files will open. Perhaps testimony will be confirmed or disproven. Or perhaps the truth will remain fragmented, scattered among memories, rumors, and classified boxes in secure rooms. Until then, the McGuire Air Force Base incident exists as a question, not an answer. A reminder that some nights do not end when the sun rises. They linger unresolved, waiting for someone to look again. Thank you for watching this investigation. If you found it compelling, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who enjoys careful, unsettling stories. And here's a question to leave you with. If something unknown crossed into our space and was met not with communication, but with force, how would we ever recognize the next encounter as anything other than a threat? Let us know your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you are watching from.